G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and today, Warhammer End Times number 3, Khaine. We're back with a new episode on the train wreck known as the End Times today. I've done 2 of these already, and each time I've done one of these videos, the format has been completely different. Today is no exception. So here's the thing. Unlike Chaos or the Empire, those first 2 books, where you have to know maybe half a dozen characters each book, you have a bit more going on with the elves. Why is this? Because there are 3 whole factions involved, plus all of their gods, only 2 of which most people can name off the top of their head, Khaine and Assyrian. So, what I'm going to do is quickly list out the characters here, so you kind of understand what we're up against. For the High Elves, we have Alariel, Tyrion, Teclis, Adrana, Aislinn, Eliathra, Anarin and Anaril, Caradrian, Delroth, Danor, Eldira, Eltharion, Finnabar the Seafarer, Imric, Corhill, Melhandir, Minaitha, I'm not very good at pronouncing that, it's Imric's dragon, Rizel, and Yestrana of Avalon. For the Dark Elves, we have Malekith, Marathi, Drain Brackblood, Drusilla, Helebron, Corin Darkhand, Lokhir Felheart, Melius Darkblade, Seraphon, Shadowblade, and Talaris Dreadbringer. Then we have the Wood Elves. We have Araloth, Ariel, Dieth, Durthu, Kalara, Nastra and Arahan, Naeth, Orion. Then we have the Legends who were sucked into the vortex at its creation, and as well as other legends of the elves. So we have Anarion the Defender, Elethanar, Astariel, Kalador Dragon Tamer, Morion, and then we have the Elven Gods, Osirian, Khaine, Lilith, Atharti, Hecate, Isha, Kuranos, Ladriel, Mathlan, and Vol. So, who here can see a problem straight away? If you've watched, say, the Hobbit movies, I know a lot of people who can't remember which dwarf is which, and get all the names straight. If you read a heresy novel, for instance, it might have half a dozen legions in there, but the characters you need to know have been there for a long time usually, maybe 5 or 6 that you really need to focus on in an early novel. By the time you get to the later novels, you can absorb a bit more information. What would be the upper limit of characters do you think one person can remember and their roles within a single story? If you guess anything under 53, then this book is not for you. And by the way, that figure is just the elves and their gods alone. This doesn't include the chaos forces present in the narrative too, of which there are many, such as Valkyr the Bloody, Nakari, etc. In keeping with the theme of naming unrelated movies to help demonstrate a point, if you've seen the movie Dunkirk, the Christopher Nolan film, excellent film, with the 3 narratives, the beach and the mole, the small boats, and of course the Spitfires, you kind of get an idea where this book is heading because it too has 3 narratives. But unfortunately, it's not an excellent movie, it's a shitty book where 3 convoluted narratives become one very convoluted narrative. Now that I've given this hopeful synopsis, let's get into the meat of it. The 3rd book is all about the Elven Civil War that has been going on for, 3,000 odd years by the time of Warhammer as we know it? And it does the resolution of this civil war more or less overnight. Starting with the High Elves, despite the characters acting without him and assuming he's just vanished from public life along with the Everqueen, Finnabar, it turns out, is actually dead. For some reason, demons are just ravaging northern Ulthuan. How? Don't know. Is this a problem? Well, apparently, because Imric wants to elect a new Phoenix King, whilst Tyrion decides it's better to just fight the demons. So this basically starts a civil war, or at least a lack of cooperation between the kingdoms of Ulthuan. Imric goes home and talks with Teclis about a shipment of dragon eggs given to him by the Dark Elves and asks what it means, as they have both spoken with Kalador in the Vortex. Tyrion, meanwhile, is off fighting Nakari's forces and they win through plot armor, even with Tyrion heavily wounded. Meanwhile, in Nagaroth, the Dark Elves are suffering from a massive chaos incursion which is led by Valkyr the Bloody. and most of the Dark Elves are simply looking after themselves. Morathi feels that she's now the avatar of the elven goddess of magic, Hecate. Malekith, well, he makes a show of fighting back against the forces of chaos, but then decides to literally salt the earth and abandon Naggaroth, reasoning that the Dark Elves have gone soft. Thus, he heads for Ulthuan and makes one last push for the Phoenix Crown. During the invasion, Malleus Darkblade just decides to cave into his demon Zarkon, and just as it looks like his forces will lose, Kalador rocks up with all of their dragons and simply joins with Malekith's forces. Where does this come from? Well, apparently those eggs were enough to buy their loyalty, I guess, and bury every single gripe that they ever had. Every single grudge. Tyrion has now lost his daughter. The Elven Kingdom is falling into Malekith's hands. He apparently has been betrayed by a brother, a lover, and faced with the thought of being forced to serve his oldest enemy, starts to go a little bit insane. And I kind of feel like he's broken the fourth wall here and become the reader. He and Elithanar fight a vicious campaign against Malekith, during which Tyrion steals the Widowmaker and becomes an avatar of Khaine. More precisely, the avatar of Khaine. He now leads a force called the Asterion, composed of High Elves willing to defy Asuryan's will in refusing to serve Malekith, and a handful of Dark Elves who feel obliged to serve Khaine by fighting alongside his avatar. So that's now Morathi and Tyrion who are inhabited by gods? How? Don't know. There are no rules, no set path of events that have to happen, and you think maybe the Widowmaker is the reason. Yet we aren't shown that. The writers need things to happen, so they just happen. During these events, concurrently, as all this bullshit happens, it's revealed that no Phoenix King since Anarion has withstood the flames of Asuryan without a team of mages warding and healing them. Apparently, the Elven Deep State runs very deep, and nobody has managed to let this conspiracy slip. Possibly they're also involved in 9/11, but that's another time. When Malekith tried, he was burned, but it was only Asuryan's test. If Malekith had been able to hold out for a few more seconds, then the full power of the Creator would have been his. Malekith was the rightful successor of Anarion the whole time because reasons. Asuryan was disappointed, but decided that if Malekith could prove himself worthy, he could still win the Phoenix Throne, despite starting that little war of the bearding, the lazy 3,000 years or so of debauchery, madness, slavery, murder, incest, pillaging, etc. Apparently, all the false Phoenix Kings who had cheated the flames, because you can just cheat a test of a god, apparently, were cursed by Asuryan with overwhelming pride and paranoia, so that they would eventually fall to ennui or insanity. Meanwhile, Teclis reveals his master plan, which is to bind each of the winds of magic to mortals, the idea being to create an equal and opposite force to chaos. Again, this makes no sense to me. The Chaos Gods are emotion-given form within the realm of chaos. The winds of magic is simply the energy of that realm which is seeping out into the world. How does giving some of that energy to mortals create the equal of gods? Where does this come from? At what point did Teclis realize he could do this? How? Did the experiment for decades to attain this wisdom practice binding one wind first, much as Nagash spent decades learning necromancy? Nope. Teclis just ups and does it, because story. We'll get back to this. So, for this retarded plan to work, the vortex needs to be closed and the threat of chaos potentially could be stopped for good. But again, we don't know how, but apparently it's that easy. Corhill then betrays Tyrion and seeks to steal the Widowmaker from him and give it to Halibron. Morathi catches him and cuts his head off with his own axe, which is done in a sloppy way at her request. Morathi also marries Tyrion and in her madness sees him as a Nerian. It's really convoluted, that's all I'll say on that. Malekith and Tyrion, they finally enter into a duel to the death on the Island of Death, whilst the spirits of dead elven heroes battle around them on behalf of one or the other of the fighters, including Altharion, whose spirit sides against Tyrion, Corhill, who gets his revenge, and the Phoenix Kings. Their skeletons fight for Tyrion, but their spirits fight for Malekith, and are only granted reprieve from their damnation if they fight for him. Okay. Tyrion defeats Malekith, but before he's able to deal the final blow, Elithanar shoots him in the back, through a hole in his armour that was created by Prince Imeric. Elithanar then shoots Malekith, because of course, and lands the shot next to his heart. Elithanar claims if Malekith does not rule justly, the next arrow would go through. As the Nagaroth arrow, thorns sprout from it and cause immense pain to his dark elf body. Meanwhile, in the Wood Elf realm, Lilith poisons Ariel and the Oak of Ages. For reasons. Alariel attempts to heal Ariel, and the two merge, becoming two mortals and a goddess in the same body. Somehow. We find out that Lilith is guiding Teclis, apparently doing a shithouse job of it because he constantly makes mistakes which have flow-on effects for everyone. Lilith confirms that the Warhammer world gods are not actually aspects of chaos, as Vatok originally wrote ages ago, but in fact are the last survivors of the last universe. Warhammer Fantasy is in a permanent cycle of death and rebirth, and each time a chaos destroys a world, the survivors from that world escape and form a new one and become the new reigning gods of that world. How? Don't know, not explained. What we do know is that this world seems to have really messed up, since when we get to Age of Sigmar, only Sigmar and the Lizardmen actually survived. Everyone else who ends up being reincarnated in Age of Sigmar only does so because the plot demands it, because Games Workshop wanted to cash in on the brand recognition. But I digress. Drycha sells out the Fey Enchantress to Manfred, who then attempts to kill her and fails. This long, winding and ultimately pointless short story ends up with the three hosts of the elves becoming one, and fighting amongst the three kindreds is then forbidden. So during the Elven Civil Warring, we have a bit of a death toll. And I've touched on a few, and there'll be more to come, but essentially it boils down to Adrana gets killed by Marathi's sorcery. Aisling is killed by Tyrion, but not before he reveals himself as Mathlan and creates a massive sea storm that shreds up Tyrion's fleet and severely reduces their number before their final battle with Malekith. Anaran and Anarel are killed by Corrin and Malekith respectively. Corhil is executed with his own axe after stealing the Widowmaker. Tyrion/Khaine is killed by Elithanar, who shoots him through the rent in his armour. Drain Blackblood is executed at Malekith's order for raiding High Elves after Malekith becomes the Phoenix King. Corrin Darkhand is defeated and killed by Elithanar, who's getting quite the kill tally here. Talaris Dreadbringer gets killed by Tyrion. Daith/Vol is killed by the Sisters of Slaughter. Actually, it's one Sister of Slaughter, and it's basically like getting stabbed in the back deal. It's not very important. Orion/Kurinos is killed by Tyrion, even though he kicked his ass pretty badly, he just lets it happen. Again, bad writing. Shadowblade gets killed by Malekith. He tries to assassinate him, but Malekith then uses his shadow magic to basically get the advantage, gets the drop on him, stabs him, throws him off the back of a dragon. Durthu sacrifices himself to give Alariel the energy she needs to invoke a large banishment spell and get rid of beastmen and demons. Fair enough. Caldor the Cruel fell in battle with his kinsman Caliadane during Malekith's invasion of Ulthuan, and Witchwithel the Wild falls in battle with the beastmen as they assault Athel Loren early in the story. So, by the time they've reached Athel Loren and repelled the beastmen, there's like 5 named characters left alive. By this point, Nagash has the Wind of Death, Karl Franz has gotten the Wind of Heavens, as explained in the previous episode. Light has been bound to Teclis' staff, so not a person. I guess it now seems that land, which naturally recognises borders, physical objects, and people can all house the winds of magic, but also they can house the gods themselves who can now inhabit mortals. But the gods and magic are also 2 distinct things. You see how this is confusing? Anyway, Malekith was meant to get the Wind of Fire, but ended up receiving the Wind of Shadow instead. In order to get the winds, as mentioned, it meant undoing the vortex, and that caused Ulthuan to sink to the bottom of the ocean, Atlantis style. Now before that happened, Morathi tried to interfere with the vortex, but Caldor Dragon Tamer pins her down and both of them get dragged into the realm of chaos by Slaanesh for a feast. Alariel, who is now the leader of the Wood Elves and harnessing the full power of Isha after merging with Ariel, as previously noted, ends up claiming the Wind of Life. Now, there's a lot of minor stuff that also happens in this book, but I think as you can tell, the book is the literal definition of a clusterfuck. You can't make sense of the events and your brain struggles to keep track of what each character is doing, where they are going, why they're doing it, how they're doing anything, and how the hell any of this works. And you eventually emerge from the experience of reading this book a shattered mess. Here's an image of me plotting out the story for this show in a way that hopefully makes sense. By the end of this book, I had many questions. The biggest of which was, how did the elves so painlessly reintegrate into one nation? The factions in Total Warhammer put up stiffer resistance to Confederation than the elves in this story bloody did. How do such opposing cultures integrate and then function as a flawless army? None of it makes sense. I'd expect the Empire and Bretonnia to more easily integrate than these people. I mean, think about it. One race are bloodthirsty torturers, seeking nothing but personal power and glory. Another race is striving to fight for all that is right and have sacrificed everything for thousands of years, namely fighting that first race mentioned. Then the last race, they despise all outsiders, including other elves, and are fey and fickle, and they only care for their own homes, and even then, they're often at war with one another and the tree people. How the fuck is this the best narrative Games Workshop could come up with? This is without a doubt the worst written source book in all of Warhammer history, and the people who made it should be ashamed of the product they put out. Do not read this book. It is a clusterfuck and an insult on your intelligence. Well, all that aside, I look forward to doing the next book, Thanquol, which will see us dealing with the Rat Men, the Lizard Men, and some more end time shenanigans. But of course, that probably won't be for a while. What I'll be looking at next will probably be more Age of Sigmar stuff, continuing on with the series I've been doing, looking at the miniatures and such. But for now, this is it. Warhammer End Times Khaine. Fucking avoid it, it's trash. It is hot trash. Whilst the rest of the End Times is sort of unintelligible and generally bad, this book is just atrocious. You could probably have had 3 or 4 books just given over to trying to solve the Elven Civil War and wrap it up neatly. But they didn't want to do that, so this is what you got. And of course, it doesn't make sense. It's Game of Thrones Season 8 given physical form. Trying to fit everything that's been convoluted and made up almost 30 years of Warhammer Fantasy history and divergence of the Wood Elves, the High Elves, and the Dark Elves being diverted back into a single book within the frame of a single book is... it is rough. People were not ready for this, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. It is too branching a narrative trying to go back into one. It's horrid. Anyway, I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. If you've read the book, let me know what you think. Do you think I'm completely wrong and it was actually a very simple narrative to follow and that it actually is a fantastic story and I'm not giving it enough credit? I would like to meet you, and then I would like to help you, take you somewhere where you can get the therapy and the help you really need. But, you know, whatever. Talk to me in the comments below. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching this episode. It's a bit shorter than the others, but hey. Do you really want like 40 minutes on this? Because I don't. See you next time.